At the crowded boarding gate of Springfield Airport, amidst the bustling crowd and the loudspeaker announcements, a flight attendant loudly criticized a teenage girl of color right in front of dozens of passengers. The girl didn't argue, didn't react. She simply took out her phone and made a single call. Not long after security personnel arrived, flights began to be delayed. No one understood what was going on. But inside the discreet meeting rooms, senior leaders started to panic. By the end of the day, one of the largest airlines in the United States was on the brink of collapse. A small moment, but its weight was enough to bring down an empire. At Gate 42, Emma Carter, the girl of color, quietly stood close to the waiting area. In her hand was an old paper ticket, and with her other hand she tightly clutched her worn-out crossbody bag. Emma wore a light blue hoodie, black jeans, and a pair of old sneakers that made a faint squeak each time she shifted her feet. She didn't draw attention to herself. She didn't stand in the priority line, just close enough in case she missed the announcement. Beside her was a group of neatly dressed passengers waiting for first-class boarding, expensive suits, polished rolling suitcases. Suddenly, a shout cut through the noise. "Hey!" Everyone turned to look. A tall flight attendant named Paula Green, in a dark green uniform, was striding towards her. "You can't stand here," Paula yelled, waving a passenger list like it was a weapon. "This area is for first-class passengers. Only economy class move back." Her voice was loud enough for everyone around to hear. Emma froze her face, turning red. She was still several steps away from the first-class line, not blocking anyone's path. She opened her mouth to explain, but Paula continued snapping. "Let me see your ticket. If not, I'll have security escort you out." Emma's hand shook slightly. She hated the noise, and even more, being the center of attention. A few passengers around her lowered their heads into their phones, pretending not to see anything. No one spoke up. No one defended her. Emma took a deep breath, her hand slipping into her hoodie pocket. But instead of pulling out her ticket, she took out her old flip phone. She pressed a single button. The phone rang twice, then a deep male voice came through the other end. "It's happening again," Emma whispered, then hung up. Paula crossed her arms and smirked. "I knew it." She muttered loud enough for the people ahead to hear. A man working on his laptop nearby, his name was Liam Brooks, looked up, furrowing his brow, but then turned away. A middle-aged woman, Sophia Bennett, sat by the window biting her lip, but remaining silent. Emma stood still, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't cry, didn't react. She only looked down at her scuffed old shoes, telling herself to stay calm. Paula turned around to walk away, thinking the incident was over. But she didn't know. No one knew that that brief phone call had set off a chain of events that no one could stop. And what was about to happen wouldn't just change Emma's life, it would also bring an end to an empire that seemed untouchable. Just a few minutes later, all eyes were on the security checkpoint. Two men in black suits walked through the crowd with an air of authority. Following them was a tall woman in a gray suit, her face as cold as stone. The three of them headed straight for Gate 42. Passengers parted to the sides instinctively, sensing something serious was unfolding. Paula noticed them and quickly straightened her uniform, forcing a professional smile. But the woman didn't glance at her once. She stopped right in front of Emma. Her name tag reading Isabella Hayes, Vice President of Customer Service. Her voice was calm and firm. "Miss Carter, are you all right?" Emma nodded slightly. Her throat tightened. Isabella placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned sharply toward Paula. "Ms. Green, please leave this area immediately." Paula's face turned pale, but all she could do was nod, step back as the crowd began to murmur. The confusion was evident on Paula Green's face. She stammered something, but when she saw the two men in black suits standing beside Isabella Hayes, her words stuck in her throat. One of them was holding a leather briefcase embossed with the airline's golden logo. The passengers nearby tried to act indifferent, but their eyes kept flicking toward the gate, curious and growing increasingly serious. Liam Brooks closed his laptop. Sophia Bennett tightened her grip on her handbag, feeling the unmistakable sense that something much bigger was unfolding. Isabella spoke this time, loud enough for all the passengers to hear. "There has been a misunderstanding. On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize if any of our passengers have been treated improperly. We will address the situation immediately." Her voice was gentle, but the tension around her mouth clearly showed her anger. Paula was about to protest, but Isabella simply raised her hand, and that was enough. Security personnel stepped forward and whispered something to Paula. Her hands shook as she was asked to leave the area. She looked around, searching for a sympathetic glance, but all she received was cold silence. The people who had once ignored Emma Carter's humiliation now stood still, their gazes full of judgment. As Paula was escorted away, Emma remained standing in place, sensing the slow but unmistakable change around her. For the first time that day, she didn't feel invisible. Isabella leaned down, speaking softly into her ear. "You're not alone. Stay strong. A little longer." Emma squeezed her backpack tightly and nodded slightly. She still didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was certain: that phone call had set in motion a wave no one could stop, and what was coming wouldn't stop at just a flight, one employee, or a gate. The entire structure inside this airline was about to tremble, and even those at the highest levels wouldn't be able to stop it. Less than an hour later, news of the incident at Gate 42 spread across the airport like wildfire. Employees whispered at the coffee counters. Passengers checked their phones constantly. Even the flight crews stopped talking, their eyes turning toward the area where the noise had erupted. On the third floor of the terminal, in an operations room with large glass walls overlooking the entire airport, the atmosphere was heating up. Douglas Reeves, head of airport security, paced back and forth, shouting into his earpiece. "Who authorized the operations team to approach passengers without prior notice?" He yelled, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning running full blast. His assistant raised her hand, her voice tense. "You need to see this." Douglas walked briskly to her desk. On the screen was a live video streaming from social media. Someone had recorded the moment Paula Green yelled at Emma Carter. The video was going viral, gaining thousands of views by the minute. The comments were filled with outrage. Some were calling for a boycott, others tagging news outlets. Some even criticized the indifference of those around until the leadership appeared. Douglas felt a knot in his stomach. This was no longer a small incident at the gate. It was a media nightmare growing bigger by the second. He grabbed his phone and quickly dialed a number. "Call Brian Holt." Right now, he ordered. Brian was the CEO of the airline, a man who hated being disturbed. But this time, Douglas knew he had no choice. There was no hiding this under a report. No putting out the fire with a free ticket. If they didn't act immediately, they could lose everything. In a private room near the boarding area, Emma sat quietly. Isabella herself had brought her there away from prying eyes and whispered gossip. A gentle woman, Deborah Lane from Customer Relations, handed Emma a bottle of water and spoke softly. "You don't need to worry any more. We're handling everything." Emma nodded, still silent. She wasn't scared anymore, but she wasn't exactly at ease either. She knew her phone call wasn't just about reporting a wrongful act. It had reached a force much greater, someone whose single word could make the entire system tremble. As Deborah whispered to Isabella in the corner of the room, Emma looked out the small window. Outside, planes lined up, preparing to take off. The engine noise rumbled, the wheels screeched against the runway. Life outside continued as if nothing unusual was happening. But inside these walls, everything was cracking. Across the city, in a high-rise glass building overlooking the skyline, a private phone rang on a wooden desk. The man who answered was Leonard Walsh. He didn't work for the airline, but he was a major shareholder. When he saw the caller's name flash on the screen, his expression darkened. He picked up the phone, his voice low and determined. "I know." Leonard said before the other person could speak. "I've seen the video. Activate emergency protocols today." In the airport, amidst the secret calls and quiet meetings, long-hidden plans began to shift. And it all started just because a girl in an old hoodie dared to pick up the phone and make a single call. That phone call, just a few short words, carried enough weight to bring down an entire corporation. At the main terminal of Springfield Airport, the atmosphere began to grow heavy. Flights were continuously delayed with no clear reason. The announcements over the loudspeakers became fewer, more hesitant. Employees at the gates whispered into their radios. The usual rhythm of the busy airport seemed replaced by an unease spreading through the air, as if the walls themselves could feel that something was crumbling from within. In a secluded room near the boarding gates, Emma Carter remained sitting quietly, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She hadn't asked for special treatment, but now those around her were treating her as if she held something fragile yet dangerous within her. Isabella Hayes stood nearby, her posture rigid, the phone in her hand, vibrating non-stop. Each new message caused her brow to furrow deeper. Suddenly, the door opened. A man in a black suit entered, his name tag reading Garrett Moore, Regional Executive Director. Under his arm was a thick leather file. His face tried to remain calm, but his eyes told a different story. Garrett nodded slightly to Emma, then pulled Isabella aside to speak privately. Emma wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the fragmented words still managed to drift into her ears, control the situation. Emergency measures, board meeting. This was already beyond anything she had predicted. Garrett turned back to her, his voice low but trying to maintain formality. "Miss Carter," he began carefully, "we deeply apologize for what you have experienced. Please trust that we are doing everything we can to address this." Emma looked up at him, her gaze calm but unwavering. She didn't speak. She didn't need empty apologies or awkward bottled water with a forced smile. The damage had already been done, and words couldn't undo that. Garrett fidgeted uneasily. "We can invite you to a private lounge to rest while we take care of a few urgent matters." Emma shrugged lightly, neither agreeing nor refusing. She stood up, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and silently followed them down the long corridor. Around her, employees rushed by, their faces clearly tense, occasionally leaning into their radios to whisper to each other. As they neared the executive area, Emma began to realize this was no longer an incident at the gate. This was a crisis. In the administrative wing deep inside the airport, chaos was rising like a flood. The sound of ringing phones was incessant. Lawyers scribbled frantically. Someone was printing dozens of screenshots from social media, stacking piles of evidence that the story had spun out of control and into the hands of major news outlets. At the center of the storm stood Brian Holt, the CEO. He slammed his hand down on the table, his voice low and cold as steel. "I want a list of everyone involved. I want to know who failed to report this according to protocol, and I want a full risk assessment report. Not tomorrow, not in an hour. Right now." A director sitting nearby, Peter Collins, head of communications, shifted uneasily in his chair. "Brian," he began cautiously, "there's something. You need to know." Brian clenched his jaw. "Then say it." Peter swallowed. "That girl, she's not just any passenger. She's Eleanor Carter's granddaughter." The room suddenly fell silent. Eleanor Carter, one of the original founders of the airline, a woman who had stepped away from the spotlight but still quietly held power through numerous shell companies. Her influence was so vast that no one dared to mention her name unless absolutely necessary. Brian looked directly at Peter, his hands clenched into fists. In that moment, he understood this was no longer a scandal that could be snuffed out with a statement. This was personal, and it involved someone with enough power to erase an entire system with a single nod. And it seemed that nod had already been given. On the way to the executive lounge, the hallway seemed quieter than usual, but with every step, Emma could clearly feel the eyes following her, worried, confused, even fearful. Some employees tried to appear busy, holding papers, typing a few lines on their computers, but their furtive glances couldn't hide what they were truly feeling. Isabella Hayes walked close by her posture, tense, her phone in hand as if waiting for more bad news. Garrett Moore led the group, his strides quicker than necessary, as though he wanted to get out of the public eye as soon as possible. When they reached the large glass doors of the VIP room, Garrett opened the door and invited Emma to enter. The space inside was entirely different. The thick carpet swallowed the sound of footsteps. The luxurious interior with its subtle colors was designed to soothe the spirits of important guests. A long window stretched across one side of the room, looking out over the runway where planes slowly taxied indifferent to the storm. Brewing inside the building, Emma sat on the edge of the leather sofa, still clutching her backpack in front of her. She stared out the window, pretending not to notice Isabella, urgently whispering in the corner with another woman who had rushed in, Clarissa Doyle, another senior manager. Clarissa wore a black dress, a neatly tailored blazer, her short blonde hair tied back in a tidy bun. Her face was filled with tension. Her voice was fast, sharp like a blade. Meanwhile, Emma sat still, quietly observing the rising tremor. Emma only heard fragments of the conversation between Isabella Hayes and Clarissa Doyle. But just from the tone, it was clear they were no longer trying to cover things up. They were preparing to face a major explosion. On the other side of Springfield City, in a vast room filled only with the ticking of a clock and the hum of computers, Leonard Walsh leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes scanning the series of news flashes blinking on the screens lining the walls. The news of the incident between a teenager and an airline employee was everywhere. Social activist groups had started speaking out. Celebrities and influencers were posting about it. Law offices quickly got involved, calling on witnesses to come forward. Leonard's phone buzzed on the desk. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who was calling. "It's done," he said into the phone, his voice even emotionless. Stop all funding immediately. Halt all merger negotiations. If necessary, leak the internal audits. They've hidden too much for too long." He hung up without needing to hear more. Leonard then opened his desk drawer, took out a thick file labeled "Confidential," and carefully placed it into his briefcase. The years of silence letting wrongdoing thrive today. It all ends. This wasn't just Emma Carter's story. It was the story of everyone who had spoken out but been ignored. Everyone who had vanished into reports buried in paperwork, and now no one would be able to cover it up anymore. At Springfield Airport, Isabella Hayes approached Emma, forcing a smile. "Miss Carter, is there anything you need? Water, food, or a replacement flight? If you'd like, we have a private lounge ready for you." Emma gently shook her head. When she spoke, her voice was low and firm. "I'll wait here." Just one simple sentence, but it carried more weight than anything else in that luxurious room. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly, stepping back to give Emma space. Meanwhile, at the gates, the chaos began to spread. 2 major flights were canceled without prior notice. Rumors spread quickly through the hall's internal investigations, employee suspensions, and some were even whispering that the airline might have to shut down part of its operations. In a small nearby cafe, Liam Brooks sat hunched over his phone screen, his eyes widening at the constantly updating newsfeed. Across from him, Sophia Bennett still clutched her now cold cup of coffee, her face pale. She whispered, It's not just about a flight delay. It feels like an entire system is collapsing." Liam remained silent, his eyes glued to the large headline, "Airline Corporation Shaken After Scandal." An internal source had revealed that shareholders were demanding an emergency meeting. Passengers like Liam and Sophia didn't know yet, but the truth was their tickets were about to become worthless pieces of paper. The flights they had booked would never take off. All the loyalty points, all the member privileges they had accumulated over time would soon hold no value, because up in those boardrooms the leadership no longer thought about passengers. They only thought about one thing: survival. And this time they might not make it. The airport, once bustling as usual, now seemed to be sinking slowly into quicksand. Security personnel weaved through the aisles, whispering into their radios, sealing off areas without explanation. Managers in sharp suits rushed past their faces as tight as a drawn bowstring, praying they wouldn't be the next name called. The chaos didn't come from the noise. It came from the heavy silence waiting to explode. Inside the VIP room, Emma Carter sat on the sofa, her backpack now placed beside her. She quietly observed the clouds drifting outside the large window. Unmoved when the door opened again. A group of people, clearly influential, entered, their faces tired and pale. Leading them was Russell Denton, the airline's vice president of legal affairs. His gray suit was wrinkled, his sleeves speckled with sweat. Behind him was Monica Reyes, the director of communications, clutching a tablet full of notes, nearly unable to keep control of the information flooding in. Isabella Hayes stood straighter when they entered, her jaw clenched tightly to keep herself from shaking. "We're ready," Isabella muttered, not sure if she was speaking to Emma or to herself. Russell stepped forward, forcing a tense smile. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "we deeply apologize. What you've experienced in no way reflects the values we strive for at our company." Emma remained silent. Her gaze was calm, but as cold as ice. Russell swallowed, continuing, "We're prepared to offer compensation, a full refund, free flight tickets, and an official apology from the board. Emma raised her hand slowly but decisively. The room seemed to freeze. "You think this is about giving away free tickets?" She spoke in a quiet but cutting voice. Russell's face paled. Monica Reyes awkwardly clutched her tablet to her chest. No one dared to answer. Emma stood up her small frame, suddenly feeling taller than anyone else in the room. "You still don't understand what's about to happen," she said, her voice soft but firm. At that moment, a knock echoed at the door. A young assistant poked his head in his face. Pale, his hand trembling as he held out the tablet toward Russell. "Sir, you need to see this right now," he stammered. Russell Denton snatched the tablet from the assistant's hand, his eyes widening as he quickly scrolled through the screen. Monica Reyes leaned in, and as she read the bold headlines, she covered her mouth in shock. Right before them, leaked internal documents. History of covering up discrimination allegations at Crestline Airways, federal investigation launched into hiring procedures, major shareholders pull out amid scandal. The screen flashed continuously with screenshots of internal emails, undeniable evidence that incidents like Emma Carter's were not isolated cases. They were part of a deliberate system where employees were trained to turn a blind eye or silence issues before they became too big. Isabella Hayes glanced at Emma. In that moment, the truth weighed heavily on her. This was not just about a girl being humiliated at a boarding gate. This was the complete collapse of an empire that had rotted from within. Standing in the corner of the room, Garrett Moore finally found his voice. He hoarsely asked, "Who leaked this?" Monica Reyes didn't look up, responding coldly, "What does it matter now?" At the same time, across town in a conference room filled with glossy brown wood tables and light leather chairs, Leonard Walsh calmly sat observing the storm he had set in motion. Around him, shareholders were shouting at each other. Phones were ringing non-stop. Lawyers rushed to hand over thick stacks of files containing lawsuits, compensation demands, and withdrawal notices. Leonard simply sat, hands clasped together, watching the whirlwind engulf everything. Back at Springfield Airport, the loudspeaker hesitated with announcements. "Attention, all passengers. Flight 317 to Boston has been canceled. Flight 220 to Chicago has been canceled. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience, but these were no longer just a few isolated flights." In an instant, every digital display in the terminal flashed red, canceled, delayed, canceled. Near the window, Sophia Bennett gripped the handle of her purse, her eyes fixed on the collapsing display boards in chaos. She turned to Liam Brooks, who still had his eyes glued to his phone screen, his face turning pale under the fluorescent lights. "This," Sophia whispered, "the whole airline is collapsing right before our eyes." At gate 42, Emma Carter stood motionless by the window, her gaze fixed on her reflection. No smile, no sense of victory, just patiently waiting, because she knew the worst was yet to come. In the executive operations room, the atmosphere grew colder. Each time a new announcement flashed from a device, the executives clenched their jaws, their expressions darkening. This was no longer a bad story to be tucked away in a report. This was a complete collapse, unfolding before their eyes, unstoppable. Russell Denton rubbed his forehead, his fingers trembling. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in just a few hours. Monica Reyes kept scrolling through her tablet, the constant updates pounding like hammer blows on the last door of the company. Isabella Hayes stood by the window arms, tightly crossed, her gaze empty, as she looked at the planes still rolling lazily on the tarmac, indifferent to the storm tearing apart inside the building. Garrett Moore was about to quietly slip out of the room, but as he neared the door, it suddenly opened. It wasn't an assistant. It wasn't a junior staff member. It was a man in a black suit with a badge prominently displaying the words Federal Aviation Inspector. His name was Martin Blake. Martin wasted no time. He pulled a letter from his slim briefcase, walked straight to Russell, and handed it to him. Russell took it, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. The contents were sharp. Federal Investigation Notice. Immediate suspension of certain operational licenses. Request for all personnel files, internal communications, customer complaint records, and hiring procedures. Failure to comply will result in the grounding of the entire fleet within the next 24 hours. Russell slumped into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. Monica Reyes held her breath, gripping the edge of the table. Isabella closed her eyes for a long moment, as if hoping the death knell would just be a bad dream. Martin Blake scanned the room, his gaze calm but firm. "You can choose to cooperate now," he said, "or prepare to witness your entire fleet sealed off in less than a day." His voice was gentle, but beneath it was a sharp threat, like broken glass. Across the terminal, passengers began to realize that something serious was unfolding. The lines at the customer service desks grew longer. Complaints echoed under the high ceilings. Children cried in their parents' arms as the electronic boards continued to blink red. One flight after another, disappearing airport employees whispered fearfully to each other. The rumors spread fast. The airline is shutting down. The government has stepped in. The end has come. In the first-class lounge, Liam Brooks paced near the window, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. He was holding the phone to contact the company's ticket agency, but all he heard on the other end were empty apologies. Across the room, Janice Monroe whispered to a group of passengers trying to organize bus rentals or find alternative flights. The fear was growing, not just fear of missed flights or ruined vacations, but the fear of being abandoned by a company that once promised reliability and service, now crumbling to dust before their eyes. In the operations room, Russell Denton finally managed to stutter out a few words. We can still salvage this." He stammered, "Just release a statement immediately. Suspend the employees responsible, commit to diversity training, cooperate with advocacy groups." But Martin Blake simply raised his hand, and the room fell silent at once. "You don't understand," he said bluntly. "You're too late." Martin pointed to the investigation order. "This is no longer about one employee. This is about the rotten culture you've built, protected and swept complaints under the rug. This isn't a bad apple. This is an entire rotten orchard." Russell fell silent. Garrett Moore collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Monica Reyes stared at the door as if wanting to run, but knowing there was nowhere to hide, Camilla. Rhodes stood by the window, her silhouette blending with the darkening sky outside. Amidst it all, Emma Carter sat quietly, watching the empire that once tried to humiliate her, now tearing itself apart. A few miles away, in a skyscraper, Leonard Walsh made the final call. "Liquidate all shares," he said briefly, then hung up the phone. He knew Crestline Airways would not survive through the night. As the afternoon transitioned into dusk, the atmosphere at the airport changed rapidly, from confusion to outrage. Passengers crowded at the service counters, voices rising with every question left unanswered. Some employees quietly removed their name tags, disappearing into the crowd, not wanting to be associated with this irreversible nightmare. The announcement screens throughout the airport flashed bright red, canceled, canceled, canceled. The entire terminal seemed frozen in a prolonged death throe. A company that once proudly soared was now collapsing in front of thousands of witnesses recording every moment on their phones. In the operations room, the atmosphere grew thick. Russell sat silently, his eyes hollow. Monica chewed her nails until they bled. Garrett hunched over his head between his knees. Camilla stood still, motionless. Blake remained by the door, his federal badge gleaming on his belt. He wasn't here to save anyone, only to witness the collapse. A frantic assistant burst in, handing Martin a piece of paper. Martin read it quickly, then said nothing, passing it to Russell. Russell took it with trembling hands. When he finished reading, he let the paper fall onto the carpet. It was a suspension order for the airline's operating license. All flights must turn back immediately. All flights indefinitely suspended. The announcement blared over the intercom. Dear passengers, all flights with Crestline Airways have been suspended immediately. Please proceed to the service desk for assistance. No one called this a disruption anymore. This was the end. In the main hall, Grant Peters heard the announcement, his phone slipping from his ear. Around him, there were shouts, children crying, the elderly slumping in their seats, devastated. Janice Monroe grabbed the hand of an airport worker. "What's happening? What are we supposed to do?" The worker simply shook their head. Sadly, "I'm sorry, ma'am. They've shut down." Inside the operations room, everything was falling apart. Monica buried her head in her hands. Garrett sat in a daze. Russell staggered heavily toward Emma. Emma Carter, still sitting there, calm in the midst of the storm, watching the disintegration she had started, just with one small call and an unwavering determination not to be subdued. Russell Denton's voice faltered as he tried to ask, "Miss Carter, is there any way we can fix this?" Emma. Carter lifted her gaze. Her voice was soft as a breath, yet it resonated in the room like a lightning strike. "You had the chance to fix this long ago," she said, "but you chose to ignore it. It's only now, when you're the ones in danger, that you care about it." Russell shuddered slightly, but he knew she was completely right. Every report that had been dismissed, every passenger complaint that had been hidden, every warning from employees that had been scoffed at. Now all of those things had become a ticking bomb, and no amount of money or promises could repair it. Emma slowly stood up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Isabella Hayes instinctively moved toward her to help, but Emma merely shook her head. She didn't need anyone to lift her up. She never had. The only thing she wanted was respect, and sadly, it had come too late. As Emma made her way toward the door, Martin Blake, the federal inspector, silently stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Everyone in the room, from the executives to the assistants, turned to look at her, not because she had yelled or caused a scene, but because while the world around her crumbled, she stood firm, silent as a rock in the middle of the storm. At the door, Emma stopped. She turned her head and looked directly at the room full of people who had once belittled her. Her voice rang out calm yet sharp. "Respect isn't something you can fake when you're scared. It only truly exists when you think no one's watching." With that, she turned and walked down the corridor, leaving behind the decaying ruins. Crestline Airways, once a symbol of luxury and pride, was now nothing more than a costly lesson in warning. and Emma Carter, the girl who had once been told to go back to her place, had shown them exactly where her place was. Standing tall while they crumbled, the hallway outside the executive operations room stretched long and eerily quiet. Emma's footsteps echoed softly on the thick carpet, each step like a nail being driven into the giant coffin. No security guards rushed to block her way. No executives followed with late promises. No more fake smiles trying to patch things up. Inside those walls, their once self-satisfied world had turned to ash, and those who had helped build it were now too busy trying to save themselves. Emma walked slowly through the corridors adorned with photographs, proud moments, handshakes with politicians, gleaming planes under the sunlight, but now it was all like a museum of a fallen empire, filled with the ghosts of promises that were never kept. Outside the executive operations room, the airport had turned into a storm of fury. Passengers, from astonished to outraged, were shouting for refunds, demanding explanations from the employees still in uniform. Some hurriedly tried to book tickets with other airlines, but seats became scarce and prices soared by the minute. Airport police officers weaved through the crowd trying to extinguish small conflicts before they turned into riots. Some passengers were crying on the spot. Elderly couples worried they might never get home. Parents holding their children trying to soothe them amidst the chaos. Business people livid over missed meetings. Emma walked through the storm like a silent shadow, steady, not letting anyone stop her. As she passed through gates and areas, she overheard fragmented conversations slipping into her ears. I heard the airlines being sued. They're shutting down everything. My brother's flight was turned around, mid-air, had to land emergency. Tonight, this will be all over the news. Emma didn't stop. She knew the real storm wasn't at this airport. It was happening behind closed doors in courtrooms, in emergency meetings and phone calls where their ringing had become the death knell. At the airport exit, where people usually waited for taxis or shuttle cars, it was now filled with television vehicles. Reporters poured out microphones thrusting into the faces of passengers just leaving the building. Some passengers shouted at the cameras. Others just shook their heads and walked away in silence. A young reporter, eyes bright, recognized Emma from the pictures flooding social media. She rushed toward her microphone, raised high, cameraman hurrying to follow behind. "Miss Carter," the reporter called out breathless. "Can you share anything about what happened? How do you feel being at the center of this incident?" Emma stopped. She slowly turned to face them. The camera lights blazed, causing her to squint slightly, but she didn't step back. She didn't shy away. "I'm not the center of anything," Emma said, her voice steady. "The only thing that matters here is the truth. And the truth always exists. It's just that people haven't been willing to look at it." The reporter was about to ask more, but Emma turned and walked away, calmly heading toward the curb where private cars were parked in a row. A black SUV slowly rolled up to her. The back door opened. A man in a black suit stepped out. Victor Hale, Eleanor Carter's personal advisor. Emma's grandmother. Victor nodded respectfully. Emma didn't speak. She silently stepped into the car. Victor gently closed the door behind her, then quickly got into the driver's seat. The SUV drove away, leaving behind the noisy crowd, the flashing lights, the shouting, and the crumbling chaos behind them. Inside the SUV, the world seemed to pause. Victor Hale glanced at Emma Carter through the rearview mirror. "She's proud of you," Victor said, his voice calm and steady. Emma leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes and letting out a long breath, one she had likely been holding for a long time. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt exhausted. Exhausted from fighting for things that should never have been a battle. Exhausted from having to prove her worth in the face of judgment that only looked at appearances and never bothered to see the soul beneath. But, at the same time, Emma felt something else. Freedom. Not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced, cast aside, made to feel invisible. The walls of lies had cracked. The truth had been revealed. And the empire that thought it was invulnerable was now on its knees, all because a girl refused to bow down. Not far away, news outlets exploded across the city. Crestline Airways shuts down amid scandal. Federal investigation confirms long-standing discrimination. Cover-up. Major shareholders file lawsuits against Crestline's executive board. In boardrooms and government offices, powerful figures scrambled to sever ties, rushing to issue public apologies. But it was too late. The wound had been made. No one could hide it anymore. Meanwhile, the SUV carrying Emma silently glided through the night streets. Through the window, the city lights blurred like tears that had yet to fall. The headquarters of Crestline. The glass tower that once proudly reached into the sky now stood as an empty husk, lights flickering erratically in the dense night. At the foot of the building, reporters and former employees gathered in a crowd. Banners were hung everywhere. Delayed justice is justice denied. We know what you did. Emma sat still, taking it all in. Memories flooded back the moment Colleen Foster had shouted at her in front of dozens of strangers. That day, she had felt small, vulnerable, exposed. But that shame had sprouted into strength, something no one, not even herself, had ever imagined. Victor steered the car into the underground parking lot of a quiet, high-rise building. The car stopped near a private elevator where two security guards in black suits stood watch. They nodded to Emma in respectful silence, not a word spoken. The elevator hummed smoothly, taking them away from the noise of the city. When the doors opened, a spacious and warm room appeared filled with books and framed photographs. Behind the heavy oak desk, Eleanor Carter rose. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp and alert, radiating a quiet pride. Leaning gently on her dark wood cane, Eleanor opened her arms as Emma walked in. Emma rushed forward and embraced her tightly. In that moment, the world outside seemed to vanish. After the long silent hug, Eleanor led Emma to a corner by the window where the city lights sparkled like thousands of tiny stars. "How do you feel?" Eleanor asked, her voice gentle. Emma stared out the window for a long time before whispering, "I don't feel like I've won. I don't feel any glory." Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze understanding without needing further questions. Because this wasn't a battle to win, she said. It was a battle to stand tall, and you stood tall when it mattered most. There are very few people in this world who can do that. Emma, no matter how much power they have. Emma leaned back into the chair, the exhaustion seeping into her bones, a kind of weariness that 1,000 nights of sleep couldn't erase. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked quietly. "Or will they just rebuild the old walls, pretending nothing ever happened?" Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "They might try," she replied. "People always want to patch up the cracks rather than destroy what's decayed. But this time will be different. You force them to face the light, and once the truth is revealed, it will continue to spread farther than you can see today." Emma lowered her gaze, inspecting her hands, the small scars, the wounds from countless battles she never wanted to fight. In school, on the streets, in front of closed doors, she had never wanted to become a symbol. She simply longed for one simple thing: to walk into any room without being treated like a mistake. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice deepening. This battle was never just about an airline. You've touched something much deeper. Every meeting room, every company that once thought appearance mattered more than character was now trembling under the shock Emma Carter had unleashed. Emma sat silently, each word from Eleanor Carter sinking deep into her soul. This fight was bigger than Emma had ever imagined. Bigger than a single lawsuit. Bigger than a fleeting news story. "You've shaken the very foundation," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "Now let them rebuild it better, or let them collapse on their own." Outside, the city was boiling under the storm of news. Across the country, corporations were calling emergency meetings. Public figures scrambled to offer hollow apologies. Shareholders demanded audits. CEOs whispered anxiously in closed offices. They wondered, could their walls hold up against the earthquake that had torn apart Crestline Airways? Emma didn't need to be in those rooms. She had done her part. She had left her mark, not with a scream, not with chaos, but with quiet resolve, a strength more enduring than any noise out there. Night fell, and the city lights blurred into rivers of golden streams. Emma sat by the window, silent, neither smiling nor crying. She simply watched, knowing that when the dawn came, the world she woke up in would be nothing like the one she had left behind this morning. Not for her. Not for anyone. And deep in her heart, a small flame began to grow, not pride but hope. True hope, intense, wild. Not something given to her, but something she had reclaimed. Hope born from the simplest, most powerful truth. When the decisive moment came, she stood up. The hours stretched on through the night, but the world refused to sleep. Crestline Airways was no longer just a company in crisis. It had become a symbol of everything whispered in meeting rooms, written in small editorial pieces, or passed around in cramped break rooms for years. Every major news outlet was covering it, non-stop. Social media was flooded with new posts, fresh accusations, new waves of anger. Former employees, anonymous whistleblowers, and brave souls stepping forward one by one told their stories of years of discrimination, mistreatment, and forced silence. Piece by piece, the image Crestline had so carefully crafted began to collapse. News editors bluntly used harsh terms: a decaying system, long-standing, deep-rooted. No one was defending Crestline anymore. No one wanted to stand by them. In the quiet room, Eleanor remained by Emma's side. They had left the main office, seeking refuge in a smaller lounge where thick curtains blocked out the noise of the city, leaving only the warm glow of yellow light surrounding them. A tray of cold food lay silently between them. No one felt hungry anymore. Victor Hale quietly entered the room, holding a tablet full of the latest reports. He placed it into Eleanor's hands, who calmly skimmed through the news, her face betraying little emotion. After a few minutes, Eleanor set the tablet down and turned to Emma. "They're offering compensation to the employees who spoke out," she said softly. "They're trying to buy silence before the courts open." Emma wasn't surprised. That's how companies often survive, or try to survive. With money, with secret deals, with promises written in ink but never etched into the heart. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze sharp as a razor. "Now you have a choice," she said slowly. "You can leave everything to the lawyers, to the government investigations." She paused. Emma turned, already sensing the rest of the statement. "Or you can push it further." The room fell into a long silence. Emma considered it. She was more exhausted than ever. Her body ached. Her mind felt like a soggy piece of paper, fragile enough that even the slightest touch could tear it apart. A part of her wanted to let go. Leave everything to the system. Let the lawyers and reporters fight on and just disappear to find the peaceful life she had lost. But another part of her, a deeper, stronger part, wouldn't let her. The system had abandoned her. Abandoned people like her thousands of times before. What was changing was not the system. What was changing was the resolve to no longer accept it. Emma straightened up. She placed her hands firmly on her knees. Her voice rang out calm but unwavering. "I'm not done yet. It's not the time." Eleanor Carter smiled a rare gentle smile full of quiet pride. "Good," she whispered, "because what they truly fear, it's not lawsuits or fines. They fear real voices, voices that keep ringing out even when money tries to silence them." Victor stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the coffee table in front of Emma. "We're ready," he said. "This is the public statement. No edits, no censorship. Full control is yours." Emma touched the cover of the folder but didn't open it just yet. She wasn't afraid. She was thinking, not about revenge but about impact. About the thousands of people she had never met. Those who had endured wounds just like hers at Gate 42 that day. About the silent battles fought every day in offices and stores and classrooms, at airports, on streets, battles that now finally had a ray of light shining through. "This is not just about Crestline," Emma Carter said softly. "It's about any place that thinks if they build walls high enough, no one will hear the knocks from the outside." Eleanor Carter nodded slowly. "And tonight, you've knocked on a door bigger than ever before." Emma finally opened the folder, scanning through the statement. It was simple, sincere, without embellishment or blame. It was just the truth. The truth about what had happened. The truth about what it meant. The truth about why it could no longer be ignored. Victor Hale handed Emma a pen. Without hesitation, she signed her name at the bottom of the page. Across the city television studios prepared to broadcast the breaking news. Media teams hurriedly edited scripts, but it was too late. No statement from Crestline Airways could compare to the raw power of the truth Emma Carter had just released. At 11:58 p.m., the statement was simultaneously released on major news sites, through activist groups, and via Emma's newly created official account. Within minutes, it spread like wildfire. By midnight, Emma Carter's name was trending in 37 countries. By 1:00 a.m., global television networks were reading excerpts from her statement live on air. By 2:00 a.m., several major airlines announced they were launching urgent internal reviews. That night, the world did not sleep. The world listened, and in a quiet place above the chaos, Emma sat by the window, watching the distant city lights shimmer in the darkness. Lights trembling before the weight of a truth she had just set free. The battle was not over. It might never be over, but tonight the silence had been broken. And for Emma, that was enough for now. Enough. The morning dragged on slowly, carrying with it the dim light of dawn in a city that had never truly rested. A vague, restless wave seemed to cover the air, heavy with the feeling that the world had just changed. On every TV screen in restaurants, hotel lobbies, airports, and living rooms, Emma's statement was replayed over and over again. Her calm words pierced through the mechanical apologies the public had grown so accustomed to, and this time they listened. In neighborhoods far from the cold glass towers, families gathered around kitchen tables, reading the news, their cold coffee cups in hand. Workers bowed their heads, waiting for buses, silently nodding along. Students shared the video in chat groups. Taxi drivers whispered to each other between rides. This was no longer just Emma's story. It had become a reflection of a society that had turned its back for too long. Emma still sat by the large window in Eleanor's office, her gaze drifting toward the sky, turning from black to a grayish purple. She didn't sleep. She didn't even try to sleep because the air around her seemed to hum with the tone of irreversible change. Across the room, Eleanor Carter slept fitfully in an armchair, a light blanket draped over her knees. Victor Hale remained alert, standing silently near the door, occasionally checking his phone, but never disrupting the quiet. He understood the burden Emma was carrying better than most. Some battles are not fought with fists or slogans, but with quiet perseverance. And now Emma was shouldering not only her own pain. Victor's phone broke the silence. He answered quickly, his voice low. After a brief exchange, Victor walked over to Emma. "It started," he simply announced. Emma stood up slowly, her body stiff from hours of sitting still. She adjusted the blanket around Eleanor more securely, then nodded for Victor to lead the way. They descended to the basement by the service elevator where a private car was waiting. Victor opened the door for her. Emma stepped in without saying a word. The car silently drove through the quiet streets. Emma rested her forehead against the cool window, watching the city waking up. Not the usual rush of a normal morning, but slow, deliberate, as if the city itself could feel it was stepping into a different kind of day. They drove to a modest red brick building nestled between towering skyscrapers. On the brass sign by the entrance, the words were engraved, "Public Accountability Office." Victor led Emma inside. The hallway was lined with simple photographs, not of politicians, not of business people, but of everyday people. Teachers, workers, nurses, drivers, the ones who had made a difference, not for fame, but because they chose not to stay silent when it truly mattered. At the end of the hallway, a waiting room was filled with journalists, activists, and community leaders. When Emma walked in, the entire room stood up. No applause, no cheers, just a deep respect that made Emma's chest tighten. There was no grand stage, no sparkling microphones, just a simple wooden podium with an unadorned black microphone on it, only a piece of blank paper. But Emma didn't need to look. She slowly walked up to the podium, her heart pounding, not out of fear but something stronger, certainty. She spoke low but clear across the room. "I didn't choose this," Emma began. "I didn't wake up one morning wanting to take down a corporation. I just wanted to be treated like a human being." The entire room leaned forward, holding their breath as they listened to every word she said. Emma took a deep breath, then continued. "But when I was yelled at, humiliated, treated as if I didn't belong here," she paused for a moment, her eyes sweeping the room. "I realized this isn't just happening to me. The shareholder meetings had turned chaotic. Civil rights groups were no longer just targeting Crestline Airways. They had sparked a movement against entire industries that had operated unchecked for decades. And it all started with a moment. One girl. One refusal to remain silent as an answer." Sitting back in the car, Emma Carter felt her body drained from exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than ever. She knew that in the days to come, people would try to distort the story. They would call it an overreaction. Some would accuse her of seeking fame. There would be rushed apologies not out of regret, but out of fear of becoming the next one dragged into the light. But none of that noise mattered. The truth was bigger than everything. The SUV rolled across the bridge, heading toward the quieter outskirts of the city. Emma looked out at the water below. The river flowed relentlessly, eroding the stone and earth, slowly shaping the land around it. She recalled Eleanor's words from long ago, when Emma had been a confused child faced with nameless injustices. You don't have to tear down every wall with your bare hands, Emma. Sometimes you just need to find the right crack. The water will do the rest. Now, Emma smiled softly, understanding more deeply than ever before she hadn't destroyed Crestline Airways herself. She had just found the crack, and the truth, like water, had poured in, doing what it always does, eroding the lies until the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. The city slowly faded behind them. Emma closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. A breath no longer filled with anger, no longer filled with fear, no longer filled with shame, but only one thing remained: freedom. True freedom. Not the kind of freedom someone grants you, but the kind you take for yourself. The kind of freedom once held no one can take away. The car continued its journey in silence, the sound of the tires blending with the distant hum of the waking city. Tall buildings gave way to tree-lined streets, to simple little houses. Here, everything looked simpler. No news vans crowding the sidewalks, no executives in a panic. Only people living their lives unaware that a crack had just formed and one day it would reach them. Victor Hale still drove carefully, never interrupting Emma's silence. He understood. Sometimes healing comes from long roads, from slow breaths, from the quiet that needs no explanation. Emma rested her forehead against the cold window, memories flashing through her mind like fragmented film. The cold shout of Colleen Foster, the indifferent stares, the quiet phone call, and then the wave crashing in. The car turned onto a small gravel road cutting through a grove of trees. At the end of the path stood a modest wooden house, its white paint faded by years' windows glowing warmly under the brightening sky. The smoke from the kitchen chimney drifted lazily into the air, and the rocking chair on the porch swayed gently. This was where Eleanor Rhodes had lived after leaving the polished boardrooms, a place that measured life not in stocks but in seasons, time and the slow rhythm of living. Victor stopped the car. Emma stepped out, the crunch of gravel under her sneakers. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke filled the air, calming her mind. Eleanor was already standing on the porch, wearing a thick woolen scarf, her cane leaning beside her chair. Her smile, this time, was genuine. Lighting up her sharp eyes, Emma climbed the steps and sat down next to her. For a few minutes, neither spoke. They just sat there, silently, letting the wind rustle the tall grass in the field, letting the first rays of sunlight paint the world in gold. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice soft. "You know this isn't over." Emma nodded. She knew there would be other companies, other gatekeepers, other irrational doors closed in her face. "This fight," Eleanor continued, "won't end neatly, just because one name has fallen." Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I know," she whispered, "but everything has to start somewhere." Eleanor smiled, a smile filled with pride, hope, and the wisdom of someone who had once stood in that very place. "Yes." Eleanor Rhodes nodded slowly. "And you've made the world listen." They sat there silently, but with mutual understanding, listening to the gentle sounds of the morning. The distant chirping of birds, the rustling wind through the trees, the barking of dogs echoing somewhere below the hillside. Emma Carter allowed the peace to seep into her body, feeling it flow into her bones. She didn't delude herself into thinking she had changed the world overnight. She knew the roots of injustice ran deep, tangled over centuries woven through countless excuses and indifference. But she had proven something not only to Crestline Airways, but more importantly to herself. That silence is not the only option, that standing up, even when your voice trembles, your limbs are weak, is always worth it. That dignity is not something granted by others, but something you assert and hold on to for yourself. Inside the house, Victor Hale was making coffee, the rich aroma drifting out to the porch. Eleanor gently patted Emma's hand, then leaned on her cane as she stood up slowly, walking inside, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. Before Emma, the vast field stretched out, reaching toward the horizon, an open expanse. And, for the first time in many years, Emma no longer felt like she was standing before a locked door. She was standing at the threshold of a road no one had given her the right to walk on. A road that she would carve for herself step by step. The battle would continue. The walls would resist, but the cracks had formed. The river of truth was flowing through those gaps. And now, Emma Carter knew. She was no longer a passenger waiting for a gate to open. She was the storm silently gathering at the horizon. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. And the world would never again be able to pretend she had never appeared. The sun rose high, casting a soft golden light over the fields, filling the air with the scent of damp earth and fresh wood. The wooden house creaked under the growing warmth of the morning sun. A few sparrows landing on the porch railing, chirping calmly as if they too were part of this moment. Emma remained still in the rocking chair, her fingers lightly tracing the worn wood grain. Here peace wasn't an escape. It was the peace of someone who had weathered a storm and knew that the storm had not defeated them. Inside, Eleanor and Victor moved quietly, giving Emma the space she needed. They understood the battles within the soul always require more time to heal. Emma's mind drifted back to the starting point, the girl standing at gate 42 clutching her backpack, her heart racing under the scrutinizing gaze of strangers. She remembered the burning shame in her neck, her trembling hands, the overwhelming desire to turn and run. But she hadn't run. She had stayed. She had made that seemingly small call, a call that had changed everything. Her phone in her bag buzzed softly. She pulled it out to see hundreds of messages, emails, notifications flooding in. Old friends congratulated her. Journalists asked for interviews. Social organizations praised her courage. Amidst it all were harsh criticisms, accusing her of ruining someone's livelihood, claiming she was seeking fame, criticizing her for not understanding the reality. Emma calmly turned off the phone, placing it face down on the armrest. Not today. Today was not for that noise. Today was a day to remember who she was before the crowds, before the headlines, before she became a symbol for something bigger than herself. The back door creaked open. Eleanor stepped out with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Emma, then sat down in the chair beside her. 2 generations. 2 battles. 1 unspoken bond. The stance, the voice, the refusal to submit. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice warm. You know, from now on, they'll write many stories about you. The speeches will mention your name. Maybe even history books if they write it right. Emma smiled lightly, her eyes still fixed on the rising steam of her coffee in the morning light. "Let them write," she said. "I know exactly what really happened." Eleanor tilted her head, a mischievous glint in her eye. "And what is that?" Emma took a sip of her coffee, letting the bitter warmth settle on her tongue before answering. "I stood up," she said slowly. "Sitting down would have been easier. I spoke," she added, "when staying silent would have been safer. And I didn't do it to be praised. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Eleanor Rhodes nodded slowly, her eyes tired yet shining with pride. "That's all that truly matters," she whispered. They sat there together longer than the coffee had gone cold. The sun slowly climbed higher, stretching soft shadows across the golden grass. The wooden house behind them stood firm, tested by storms through the years, still as steadfast as a testament. Strength is not always loud or fierce. Sometimes it's simply the decision to stand tall when the whole world wants you to fall. As the afternoon quietly drifted in, Emma Carter stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. A gentle breeze blew through, lifting her hair lightly, as if offering a silent encouragement. In front of her, the field stretched out, open and endlessly. No gate blocking the way, no boundaries, no shouts to stop her. Emma left the porch, her canvas shoes touching the soft grass. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, secure. Each step lighter, freer, as if the weight she had carried all these years was slowly leaving her with each step. She knew that outside the world was still a mess. There would still be battles, there would still be injustice. There would be moments when silence seemed like the easier choice. But Emma knew she would not be silent. Not now, not ever. She had found her voice. And, more importantly, she had found the strength within herself. A strength not born from anger, but from truth. Not relying on applause or headlines, not dependent on the recognition of others. A quiet, steadfast strength living in her heart, unshakable. As Emma walked deeper into the field, the wind lightly nudged her forward as if whispering, "Keep walking," and she would. One step at a time, one voice at a time, one stand at a time, because change doesn't come when giants suddenly become kind. Change comes when ordinary people like her refuse to bow down. Emma Carter had refused to bow down. She was walking toward the future she had created for herself. A future wide open, stretching ahead. No barriers, no limits, completely hers. Some stories don't need to end with loud applause. Some changes don't begin with power or money, but with an ordinary person daring to stand up and say, "Enough." Today, we have witnessed that journey. The journey of a small girl in a world too accustomed to turning away. Emma Carter not only reclaimed justice for herself, but also paved the way for millions of others. Those who were forgotten. Those who were overlooked. And you, the one watching this video, you have that power too. The power to speak up. The power to choose not to be silent in the face of injustice, even through a small action. If today's story has touched you, if it makes you believe that one voice can change an entire world, please hit like to let us know you were here. Share this video so that even more people can find hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us in the next inspiring stories. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that kindness and truth still have a place in this world. See you in the next story.